So now that we've covered grass foliage, it's time for us to look at the regular foliage tool. Now we covered this briefly when we were doing the architectural demo, but I just want to cover it again since we are looking at outdoor landscapes, which is really where this tool was intended to be used. So within this, I'm able to open up the content browser. I'm just going to dock it to my lower panel here. And then if I want to, I can actually select any meshes. In this case, I'm going to shift select the ferns and flowers. And I can drag them into here where it says foliage type. So from this, I'm able to actually set up the densities and everything else. It's worth noting that for any of these settings that I want to keep for later use, I can also save them out as a foliage asset that I can then just drop back in to keep those settings. So if I have a particular setting that I really like for dense long grass or something like that, I might want to save it out. In this case, I'm going to set the density to be quite low. As before, it's going to be within a 10 by 10 area, so I'm going to keep it quite low for all of them since they're all being added in the same location. So 5, 5, 5, 5. So I've added all of these now, and to apply them into the game, all I need to do is left click, and you can see if I zoom in, that we've got nice flowers and plants being placed in that area. I can also shift left click and remove them. Keep in mind as well that I can mix and match some of these. So if I want to turn off the plants, I can just uncheck them. And now we're only going to be planting flowers wherever I left click. The other thing that's worth noting is there's a couple of settings here that you can tinker with to kind of get the desired effect of whatever it is that you're doing. And that is that if I go to here, you can see that we've got random scaling, just as we did before. So I can set this to have any scale that we want to have, so that some flowers are taller than others, for instance. I can also set this up so that align to normal is on or off, which allows us to get the flowers to either automatically place themselves along the ground shape. See, as I painted there, they're sticking to the ground. Or if I wanted to, I could turn that off, at which point they would be flat and facing directly upwards. Again, if I go through here, there's other settings too that can be quite useful. Statically baked lighting versus movable. Often you want these static, but if you are doing an entirely dynamic lighting system, you may want them movable. The other thing here is collision presets. Now by default, anything you paint in the foliage tool is not going to have any collision on it. So if you want to enable collision, you need to actually make sure it's been set up here. And that's really important because if you want to use your foliage tool for trees or something, then you need to consider, how that's actually happening. So again, I can just kind of paint this through if I wanted to. Have a very simple outdoor scene, and if I was to be over here, I could see that while there's grass and everything over here, I can see these plants kind of popping in. And the great thing is that much in the same way as the grass was set up before, these things do actually lot out at a distance as well. So if there are LODs set up for your assets, you can tell them to have specific foliage scaling set up, which just cuts down on a lot of the overhead. These can be done on a per system level as well, so you can set up certain graphical settings to remove foliage more abruptly than other machines. The final thing that I want to go through is at the very top here. So at the moment this has been told landscape static mesh BSP, which means that if I was to drop a mesh into the game itself, so if I was to get this mesh for instance and make it quite large and then went back to my foliage tool, this mesh doesn't actually have collision, so that doesn't demonstrate it particularly well. If I was to get a mesh that had collision, I'd be able to currently paint onto it if my foliage tool had static mesh checked. If I uncheck these, it'll only do landscape painting. So I can actually use the foliage tool to paint onto different meshes and stuff like that. So if I have like a walkway set up, I might want to use the foliage tool to spread various clutter and grime and whatnot across the top of it, whereas if I disable it, it's only going to adhere to the landscapes, which is quite often what you actually really want to have happening. So it's a reasonably variable tool. Keep in mind that it's always accessible to you. And from here, we're now going to actually start building a map itself. So something that's going to actually be the arena for the player to have.